The price gouging was instantaneous. We started to see people just like waving the red flag saying, I'm seeing this listing. It's up 30% from 2 weeks ago. And that's because there was all of this demand. Tens of thousands of people had to evacuate. So they just flooded the rental market.
So Los Angeles has just been through these incredible, devastating fires, which we know, of course, is a human story. But for us, there really is a real estate story here, too. You swung over to help some of the folks on our LA team cover this as it was happening and in the last few weeks as we've been starting to deal with fallout. Tell me a little bit about what you were looking for going into this coverage.
Yeah. So, when I jumped over to help, I think we were just trying to address the initial questions that were coming up, which was, where were these people going? There were tens of thousands who were displaced by the fires. How is that impacting the rental market, the hotel market? And then what was the industry saying? So folks like Rick Caruso. Just a few days into the fires, the question that we wanted to answer, that started to change. And it wasn't that we were changing the question. It was that, residents and brokers in the city and state were starting to ask, how are we going to rebuild? So myself and the LA team, we wanted to look at that from two angles. One is, what do residents want, and what would be good for the city and state. But then the other piece of it is, what are the obstacles there? Because there are so many. So it's insurance, it's red tape. The city and state, they make it notoriously difficult to build in Los Angeles. And then also, the emotional toll of the fires. Do people want to move back to places that have been quite literally obliterated by LEASES?
Right. And so as you're looking at this and starting to think about these rebuild efforts, rebuilding will happen. Real estate will be an enormous part of that. But they'll also be fundamentally different. The cities of Altadena, Pasadena, and Pacific Palisades will be really changed. So what are you looking at there? How do you expect some of those places to shift, and how does real estate play a part in that?
I think the first thing to say is that most people do want to rebuild, and they do want, there's this idea of like wanting to go back to the home that you had before it was lost. That said, money will be an issue here. So insurance is sort of the biggest factor. It's very difficult to get insurance in California. And we know even people who do have it, not all of them are fully insured. We also know the state can't entirely cover, the state's sort of like backstop insurance plan can't cover all of the claims that are going to come out of this. So best case scenario, you have insurance, you're going to rebuild your home in the Pacific Palisades. Maybe you make it the way it was. But maybe you either don't have insurance or you don't want to wait out the time for a rebuild. The demographic in the Palisades is a bit older. Those people might sell, and it might create an opening for a younger demographic to come in who may want different homes and will most likely want safer homes, and that will sort of change the look of things. In Altadena, the Palisades is very wealthy. Altadena is upper middle class, but a little bit, there are less wealthy folks than in the Palisades. So it is possible that insurance will not cover everything that, these residents need to rebuild their homes. Some of them may opt to sell. And if developers can, piece together enough parcels, that could create an opportunity to build denser housing there.
Yeah. As the shift starts to happen, real estate is always looking for opportunity. And there's, I think, two sides to this here. There's price gouging, which you've been covering as a big concern. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, how you've been covering it and what you've been seeing. But then also there are, genuine and legitimate opportunities for real estate to make changes during this rebuild. So tell me a little bit about those things.
Yes. So the price gouging was instantaneous. We started to see, I would say mainly on social media, people just like waving the red flag saying, I'm seeing this listing. It's up 30% from 2 weeks ago. And that's because there was all of this demand. As I said earlier, tens of thousands of people had to evacuate. So they just flooded the rental market. A lot of that was nipped in the bud. It is illegal in the state of California to raise prices above 10%. So I think there was, a crackdown by the state and also the county of Los Angeles. We did recently see a lawsuit against Blue Ground, which is a short-term rental company, alleging that it, inflated rents, and Blue Ground denied. But just to show that, there was that like snap reaction by some landlords, and then there was a government responds to that.
Sure.
On the opportunity side, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that LA is in a housing crisis, and it has been for a long time. And the fires have made that worse, undoubtedly. They wiped out, I believe at this point, it's over 16,000 structures.
Yeah.
But if the city, the county, the state of California uses this as a chance to do away with some of those, permitting or environmental regulations that really tie things up and maybe aren't entirely necessary, it could create this runway to build housing that, is really severely needed in the area. And that, is good for the city, the residents, the county, the state. It's also good for developers.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, Susie. I appreciate it. So, Katie, you wrote about Jesse Hamilton for the latest issue. Tell me who he is and why he's important.
Yeah, so he is the Deputy Commissioner of Real Estate Services at the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, or BCAS. In that role, he oversees the city's office leasing activities. So when a city agency needs office space, that agency oversees the whole process. All told, he oversees 22 million square feet of private office space and has, a key role in deciding, where these agencies end up.
Yeah. So he's in the news because he's been involved with this big scandal that's roiled the Adams administration. Can you explain his connection to that for us?
Yeah, so basically he sort of got on people's radar because he returned from a vacation from Japan with the mayor's chief advisor, or former chief advisor, Ingrid Lewis-Martin. He was also with a Cushman & Wakefield broker at the time, Diana Boutros, and they had their phones seized. So that was sort of the start of all of this. We still don't know sort of where that investigation is at this point, but a lot of questions have come up around what his role has been in city office leases, whether or not he's sort of put his thumb on the scale for certain landlords over others. There was a case of the Department of Aging in the city moving to 14 Wall Street, which is owned by a donor to the mayor. And, in that process, they, declined to lease at 250 Broadway. So that's something that a bunch of different city organizations are looking at right now. But yeah, we still don't know sort of the full extent of, whether or not he's involved in sort of the bigger probe into the mayor and the administration. We're still waiting for answers on that.
Yeah, and the city is a huge lesser of space within New York City, and it's a really challenging time for office landlords. So tell me a little bit about how that factors in.
Yeah, so I think especially right after the pandemic, during the pandemic, office landlords were struggling to keep tenants in place.
Yeah.
The city is a guaranteed check.
Right.
So I think in some ways, obviously leasing to a city agency is going to take longer maybe than some other tenants because there is a whole public process you have to go through to get those leases finalized. But at the end of the day, those landlords know that they can depend on the city to pay their rent. So I think, having the city as a tenant was really attractive to a number of landlords.
Yeah, during that time. And so we have a lot of questions still that need to be answered in terms of this larger scandal and who's really involved. Important to say that Jesse Hamilton hasn't been indicted or accused of any illegal activity, and neither has Diana Boutros, the Cushman & Wakefield broker who he was with in Japan. But Ingrid Lewis-Martin has been indicted, as has Mayor Eric Adams. So what are you sort of looking for next as this saga continues to play out?
Yeah, the big question is whether or not he will ultimately be accused of wrongdoing, if he will eventually face charges. We're also looking at, as I mentioned before, the city-level probes into city office leasing. So at the very least, we are watching to see what those audits and investigations turn up on office leasing and whether or not it'll lead to long-term changes to that process and whether it'll lead to changes in leadership at DCAS.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Katie.
Thank you.
So, Kate, now that Donald Trump is back in office, all eyes are on Palm Beach. But it's a really radically different market than it was when he came into office the first time 8 years ago. So tell me a little bit about how it's changed.
Yeah, so that was the story that I wanted to tell immediately. It was like, oh my gosh, the global spotlight is back on this tiny island, and it really is so different than it was in 2016 when he was elected. You know, used to be the butt of a lot of jokes about 5 p.m. dinners and lots of pastels. And I would say the pastels are still like very in vogue in Palm Beach. But, you know, the real estate investment really since the pandemic has exploded the market. You know, it's a younger crowd that's there. It's a more year-round crowd. It's causing a lot of like the private schools are really full. The private clubs are really full. There's been a lot of new restaurants. It's now this kind of epicenter of ultra luxury real estate in the U.S. You know, the most trophy home sales of really any market in the U.S. So, and then you add to that over the bridge in West Palm Beach, you know, developers like Steve Ross have been investing billions of dollars in really, you know, revamping the city in a big way and making it kind of a hub of American commerce and power. So, yeah, it's a completely different market than it was when he first got elected.
Yeah. And you mentioned the pandemic as a catalyst for some of this, but how much is this about proximity to Trump, or how big of an effect do you sense he's had?
When I talk to sources, they really point to just that he has raised the profile of the market so much just by bringing all of these eyeballs. And, you know, when I talk to agents, they're saying, you know, for the 75 days of the transition period, there were a lot of people coming to town, for the first time and seeing Palm Beach and going, oh my gosh, like it's beautiful here. You know, being more interested in the market than they would have otherwise. You know, and then I think also there's just the certainty factor, which is, you know, something that comes up pretty much every presidential cycle is, you know, leading up to an election, the market will really slow down. People don't know what's in store. They don't know, you know, which party's going to win and where that will set in the market. And then as soon as they kind of have that decision and they know what the next 4 years is going to be, they're ready to make a move. And so that's also part of just the post-election Trump up.
Yeah. And so you wrote in our latest magazine about this sort of perception and these bigger picture shifts that have happened in Palm Beach, but you're trying to put some numbers to it as well, to the Trump bump. Tell me a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are looking at numbers for 2024 and 2023 November-December sales, and then also November-December sales in 2016, 2015, and 2020, 2019. So doing like a little bit of basically comparing the last 3 presidential elections to one another, seeing how much is this just part of the market cycle and how much of this is a Trump bump. And like we did find there was a bump in 2020 after Biden was elected. There was no bump in 2016, but there's been a 400% bump.
Wow.
In 2024. So this shift really is tangible, and you know, the agents and the market have been feeling it.
Yeah. So that story is coming online soon, and the feature's available in the issue now. Kate, thanks so much.
Thank you, Hannah.
So Keith, you've been covering a lot of different real estate players who are all based in one particular town in New Jersey. Tell me a little bit about that and why that led to you taking this reporting trip to Lakewood, New Jersey.
Lakewood is really a boom town, and it's driven by largely Orthodox Jewish families who come there for a better quality of life, kind of suburbia, the yeshiva, the MG, where many graduate from and then stay there. Lakewood has also become, in recent years, a hub for commercial real estate deal making. In the past year or so, there has been this widening investigation by the Department of Justice and the FHFA over mortgage fraud and on suspect transactions. And the Department of Justice press releases announcing some of the indictments, they would mention certain Lakewood companies. And some of these people who were indicted were from Lakewood as well. So then the question really became, what's happening in Lakewood?
Mm-hmm. And so you went on a reporting trip there. What did you see?
Very congested traffic, a lot of cars, a lot of new upscale shopping centers with expensive kosher restaurants and these incredible new office park where they think 1 million square feet of offices that look like something out of Miami or Dubai, or like inspired. You could see a lot of wealth, and one of the things that was really remarkable is that there was a lot of signs of charity everywhere. So it was kind of like this, like a modern version of this like Americana.
So you spoke to a few locals with a pulse on the real estate community there. What did they explain to you about the culture of Lakewood that has tied it to this larger scandal, or how the scandal has impacted them?
Well, I think it's important to be clear that this isn't, not to paint a broad brush. And I want to be very clear about that it's not everyone that is involved in some sort of scheme or scandal. But then there's also kind of this unfortunate reality that these indictments are coming and they're naming people from Lakewood or surrounding area. And it appears that there's just going to be more. Most people didn't want anything to do with us because they think we're airing the community's dirty laundry or ruining people's lives or are gossipers. One of the people I did speak to is Ellie Puritz, who is indicted and is facing a jail sentence of 2 years in a mortgage fraud scandal, where he allegedly inflated the price of a office building in Michigan to obtain a larger loan. First off, he does acknowledge his mistake, that he made a mistake. So that is first off. A lot of it is just his expectations, he said he felt. So you're expected to not just maybe operate a nursing home, but own a nursing home. Not just one, but 5. That was what is kind of remarkable about the community, is that you would see these people who were very young, doing very, very well. And he said that kind of created this pressure to be very successful in a very short period of time. What Ellie claims is that he was not given a lot of professional business classes that really said, okay, this is how real estate, this is how it works. Now, it is interesting. They are having talks in Lakewood that prominent defense attorneys have attended, talking about just some of these legal issues and things that are kosher and some things that are not kosher. So it seems like there is at least this acknowledgement that there are these problems. You can't just write these stories of people going to jail and then this guy from Borough Park, this investor, committing suicide. And then you can't just write these things and not ask, why is this happening? Why is a 33-year-old owning this large portfolio of real estate and then decides, to tragically end his life? It is really a question that I think has to be answered. I'm not like a social activist or community organizer. It's kind of just to report what's going on, and then I hope people reading it and discussing it will just, really think about these things as they go forward with real estate.